The side event is now in session. First of all, I'd like to thank the Commission for Social Development for allowing me to speak to you at the side event. I would also like to welcome distinguished delegates and representatives of member states, officials of the Commission for Social Development, officials of the UN special agencies, as well as my fellow NGOs, and most particularly the webcast viewers and anyone else I forgot to mention. Greetings to everyone. My name is Maurice, and I am the president of a citizen journalist association called the International Association of Independent Journalists. And I'm here to represent the general public and summarize a report we produced in May of 2016 called The Issue of Permanent Ongoing Participation of the General Public at the United Nations. We wish to provide a platform for permanent, ongoing participation of the general public at the United Nations and in all its activities. Now, in the past, participation by the general public was always looked at as an unattainable ideal. But today, current technology can actually make this a reality through a cell phone application, and it is the purpose of this side event to show how it could be made to work. However, for this report to have any force in becoming policy at the United Nations, we would first need to have a formal request for participation at the United Nations by the general public, and then a report to back up the viability of such a request. Okay, so here is that formal request. We, the majority of the people on this planet Earth, ask the United Nations through ECOSOC and the NGO Committee and the Commission for Social Development to give us the means to actively participate in all aspects of United Nations activities. The Charter of the United Nations clearly gives us the right in the preamble and the following articles to participate at the United Nations on an equal basis with nations large and small. And now that practical logistics to such participation are no longer a barrier, we ask that such participation be granted as soon as possible. As stated in the preamble to the Charter of the United Nations, in equal rights of men and women and nations large and small, and as stated in Article 8 of the Charter of the United Nations shall place no restrictions on the eligibility of men and women to participate in any capacity and under conditions of equality in its principal and subsidiary organs. Men and women, or in other words, the general public, shall have no restriction on the eligibility to participate in any capacity and under any condition of equality in its principal and subsidiary organs. In other words, the General Assembly on down. NGO participation at the United Nations clearly does not properly embrace the totality of the general public participation. The general public is not an organization whose membership is limited in any way by any type of membership or ideology or any of the usual characteristics of an NGO. General public participation at the United Nations is a special case, but must nevertheless be accommodated for if requested. This statement is the formal request by Maurice of the International Association of Independent Journalists, Inc., on behalf of the general public to ECOSOC and the NGO Committee and the Commission for Social Development at the United Nations headquarters in New York City on February 7, 2017, which would seem to be the proper organs for the United Nations with which to make this request. We await your reply to be responded to the NGO facilitating this request on behalf of the general public, which is the International Association of Independent Journalists, Inc. And the statement will be duly broadcast to the world at large by all means possible. So I think we just made history there. It's not the way I thought it would be, but I have never seen anyone come to the UN requesting that the general public be able to participate in an ongoing, permanent way in all UN activities with a turnkey solution that provides that participation and with charter support of the United Nations. I've never seen it happen. Technology has made this available, and somebody has to make the plea, make the demand. If you don't ask for a right, nobody is obligated to give you that right. Somebody has to ask it. And I'd like to think that I am the first with these entitlements to ask and start this going. And it is my hope that years from now, everybody in the world will be able to participate in a permanent, ongoing fashion at the United Nations if they wish. And I think that's going to be the greatest thing for humanity and humanity's self-determination. Okay. Having said that, I will also state that our organization has had no contact and it has no affiliation with any other organizations of similar online participation, some of which are quite successful programs. We are here to ask for full participation in all activities of the United Nations as members of the general public, which will now be addressed in this presentation. To allow the general public to participate at the United Nations would require these necessary items, and there are 4 of them. First would be a survey to show that a random sample of the general public actually desire to participate at UN activities if they become available. Then we would have to show that cell phone applications would actually work to provide the general public participation at the United Nations. However, in addition to the cell phone applications, we would need to show that the infrastructure of the internet can handle the extra load of a 7.4 billion person one-day vote. Finally, we need to investigate the Charter of the United Nations and see how the Charter would allow permanent ongoing participation in all aspects of United Nations activities. If all these elements needed for permanent ongoing participation of the general public at the United Nations can be met, we will have a most powerful argument to present to the United Nations to make permanent ongoing participation of the general public in all activities of the United Nations a reality. And now we will get to the first part of that, which is a survey. There we go. And our survey question was, do you support the idea of permanent ongoing participation of the general public at the United Nations and in all aspects of United Nations activities? And the reply was a yes or no. We asked 839 people, of which 72.34% responded with a yes vote. Our survey has a margin of error of 4%, and that means that if you ran the survey 100 times asking a different sample of people each time, the overall percentage of people who responded the same way would remain within 4% of your original result in at least 95 of those 100 surveys. Therefore, from our results, we would expect further polls to stay between 68.34% on the low side and 76.34% on the high side. Our sample size is only pertinent to the global response, online, and physical solicitation in North America. However, the sample size is large enough to make guarded conclusions from the empirical data received. The survey was conducted in English, which meant there was limited participation in countries where English was not their first language. In conclusion, the percentage in favor of supporting the idea of permanent ongoing participation of the general public at the United Nations and in all aspects of United Nations activities is 72.34%, which as a real number out of the total world population of 7.4 billion people equates to 5.35 billion people. That is a number greater than any individual nation on earth. As a group, these people deserve a voice at the United Nations independent of where they live or which nation they fall under, because the general public are ultimately the stakeholders in all UN activities. Okay, that was a survey. So we've shown that the majority of the general public want to participate at the UN. I'll tell you that as I was doing the survey, the number of no's was decidedly higher than I had anticipated, and we actually asked these people why, and there were all kinds of concerns to hacking, to are they really informed enough to make these decisions. But ultimately, in the end, when this becomes a daily thing, these people will be more informed. They will take it seriously. I mean, they have their reasons. They're valid, and they're in the survey. But yeah, that was a surprise that we did get that many that did vote no. It's not a major thing, but it was surprising. Anyways, survey out of the way. Let's move on to the cell phone application. The cell phone application used for this study was made with the MIT App Inventor 2 application for Android cell phones. I've got to say that I'm impressed with MIT's App Inventor 2, which I used. If you ever go on there, you'll see school kids and young teenagers learning to develop applications. We picked this one because it is endorsed by several areas of the UN, and it's open source code. Anybody that picks up the cell phone and looks at the app can be sure that there's nothing malicious in the coding. It's there. It's from a respected source, MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and so that's why we use them. At any rate, this application is for Android cell phones. This cloud-based application is only for Android operating systems and was chosen for ease of use. The App Inventor 2 application used application blocks for coding as opposed to straight line-by-line coding to make an Android application. Therefore, ordinary individuals and many school-aged young people can successfully make applications that can be published and even made available on the Google Play Store for download. So, the first page when you launch the app has this yellow button, United Nations participation. You hit that yellow button, and you're taken to a second page, and I don't know if you guys can see this on the web, but you hit the second page, and the lower part of the screen is the actual United Nations welcome page, and you can access every area of the UN website from that. But we also have 3 buttons above it that allow you to increase your knowledge directly of UN activities before making a vote. And these 3 buttons are the UN audio channels, which provides you with live and recorded audio feeds, UN News, which provides you with the United Nations news feed, and the UN calendar, which provides you with upcoming events at the United Nations. So basically, when you launch the app and you hit the participation button, you're taken to a page that allows you to familiarize yourself with whatever proposition is being discussed so that you can make an informed decision when you hit the second yellow button, which takes you to the proposition page. And the proposition page in yellow, it's like follow the yellow brick road. You see the proposition under discussion, and you have 2 yellow buttons, a yes or a no button. The hitting either the yes or no button takes you to another page which acknowledges the vote that you did, either a yes or no, and also tells you that only 1 IP address per vote will be recorded. It could also be a device number on a cell phone or a desktop or whatever, but we chose IP for our application. The votes recorded for our test sample were recorded as page views as yes or no. On an actual application through the United Nations, you would see a far more elaborate system and far more filtering. We did filter for multiple IP, but it works. It's simple. For people to download this app in all areas of the world, it has to be incredibly Spartan. If we made the app with animations and stuff, we would be cutting out various parts of the third world because of the processing power and data size required to make the app work. So we've deliberately made it simple and Spartan to get everybody voting in an equal way, a level playing field. Okay. The specifics of all aspects of the application and usage are too involved to go into here, but that is the general idea. You would also have to advertise these applications, so in addition to the above, we would need advertising to inform the public of its existence and to have a successful launch of the application. In this very simple way, general public participation by anyone in the world is possible to guide member nations in global policymaking by showing raw population approval or disapproval for the proposition under discussion. People now live, breathe, and sleep with their smartphones, and having a dedicated app on that phone keeps them connected and interested in UN activities more than any other apparatus envisioned to date. The application in question was for Android-based cell phones, but iOS, iPhone, and Windows phones and desktop applications are easy to make available. Of course, the general public cannot have a vote at the United Nations as member nations have, but poll numbers on a proposition are sometimes persuasive in policymaking by their mass approval or disapproval. General public participation through the use of cell phones and desktop computers is a viable reality in terms of using applications for that purpose. Okay, so basically what we've done is showed you that the majority of people on Earth would be in favor of participating at the UN in all its activities in a permanent, ongoing way. Then we showed you the cell phone app that would make this possible. That's not a big thing, but you know, it's a turnkey solution right there. The bigger question is the infrastructure requirements, which we're going to get to. How are we going to have a possible 7.4 billion person vote handled on our current infrastructure? So we get to that right now. If we can make a cell phone application available for the general public for use in participating at the United Nations, the next question to address is whether the current internet infrastructure is capable of handling a vote where all 7.4 billion people could vote in a single day. To investigate this, we need some facts and figures. Now, obviously, you never get 100% of people voting on a proposition. Maybe on a high side, we'll get the people that were really interested, which is about 5.35 billion. But we want to see if you really could get everybody on Earth voting in one day. Anyways, here's some facts and figures. The annual projected global IP traffic in 2016 should be 1.1 zettabytes. Don't even ask me to break down that figure. It's enormous. And that works to 88.4 exabytes per month. Traffic from wireless and mobile devices will exceed traffic from wired devices by 2016. So it's already happened. The majority of people are entering the internet through their cell phones. And I happen to know from our membership in places like Africa, their first experience with the internet is through cell phones. So that is why we developed the cell phone app. Now, by the time this idea could become reality, you can see the trend would be for the majority of people accessing the internet through their smartphones. Now, actual internet users. The number of internet users as of the 30th of November 2015 was 3,366,261,156. I don't know how they got it down to 156, but whatever. Which is 46.4% of the world's population. So by the time this type of policy could become reality, the majority of people of the world would be connected through the internet through their smartphones. So that gives direction on where to apply your resources in enabling people for this type of participation. Now, the world uses 3 exabytes per day, and the data size of our own question is 741 kilobytes, which is, or about 1 megabyte on average. So giving that information, if you have a 7.4 billion user vote in one day, this equates to 1/4 of 1% extra burden on the total data capacity of the internet for one day in question. Now, to put this into perspective, realize that Facebook gets approximately 4.5 billion likes a day, which is sort of a vote. So the question of whether the current internet infrastructure can handle the strain of a popular UN vote among the general public must be seen as a yes. Okay, so let's go to the charter. This is the most important. Yep, have a seat anywhere. This is the most important part of the side event. Everything else is just talk unless we can actually show that the UN Charter actually allows for this type of participation. This is where we stand the UN Charter on its head and change the way or bring in a new form of global governance. So, to accommodate true general public participation at the United Nations, we may have to allow this participation as an in-house entity of the United Nations under the control of the Economic and Social Council, or ECOSOC, as there is no organization of the general public. So if there has to be an organization, I submit that the United Nations itself is the organization of the general public, and as such does not require acceptance through the NGO committee, as the United Nations does not need to vet itself to have status at the United Nations. The general public is the most basic form of association of men and women and has rights to participate it as granted in the preamble of the United Nations Charter and the articles that follow. Therefore, when looking at the idea of general public participation at the United Nations, we shall start with the preamble to the Charter of the United Nations, a preamble which at its end creates the idea and name the United Nations. Now, for me, this all hinges on the preamble, which technically does not have a legal force in itself, but guides direction of the articles that follow. If you are able to reinterpret the preamble, the articles become and have a life of its own, and maybe in directions that most people don't think they would have. But at any rate, let's go to the preamble, which is, Please note this passage in the preamble of the Charter of the United Nations: to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights and in dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women and nations large and small. So, men and women, nations large and small, are all equal in the rights of this entity called the United Nations. Also note that these men and women, in quotes, are plural and general in nature, and as such are the general public. That passage is important as the preamble gives broad direction to the articles that follow. Most of the articles that relate to nations, but the ones that men and women have some relevance, reside in Article 8. And the ECOSOC articles, such as Articles 61 to 72 and specifically 71 of the Charter. And it is there that we find the ability to allow public participation at the United Nations. Perhaps the architects of the Charter had this idea of men and women and nations large and small to be equal as true and noble, but knew all along that the pragmatic implications made it impossible for individuals to participate at the United Nations in the same way as nations could. However, with new technology, it is now possible for that statement to finally ring true. All we need is a desire in member nations and the bureaucracy of the United Nations and the embracing of these new technological tools to bring participation of all women and men to all activities at the United Nations. There is no argument of men and women being allowed to participate at the United Nations on an equal footing with nations. That is given in the preamble, and then note in Article 8, so we have Article 8, the United Nations shall place no restrictions on the eligibility of men and women to participate in any capacity and under conditions of equality in its principal and subsidiary organs. Thus, from Article 8, we have verification of men and women to have no restrictions to participate, taken in the broadest interpretation that must logically hold valid. As the general public, which consists of men and women, shall have no restriction on eligibility to participate at the United Nations. It then only becomes a matter as to how to practically and pragmatically allow for this participation. And note that it says in its principal and subsidiary organs, meaning the General Assembly down. Our current practical solution of a popular vote on global issues through ECOSOC is for that information to be made available to the General Assembly for use in policy making would appear to meet the goals of Article 8, allowing a practical method of participation in principal and subsidiary organs of the United Nations. Okay. We go to Article 71. In Article 71, and I'll read it for you here, the Economic and Social Council may make suitable arrangements for consultation with non-governmental organizations which are concerned with matters within its competence. Such arrangements may be made with international organizations and, where appropriate, with national organizations after consultation with the member of the United Nations concerned. In Article 71, organizations are given the ability to participate at the United Nations. With this utility in mind, can the general public be looked at as an organization? Well, the Macmillan Dictionary defines organization as a group of people who have a particular shared purpose or interest, for example, a political party or charity. I would say that people that want to vote on some proposition at the UN is an organization within the terms of Article 71. They are there with a particular purpose to vote and participate in the running of human society. But while we can show that the general public has a right to be involved with the United Nations, how can it function there without being a typical organization with elected officers and staff? The answer is that the organization in question is the United Nations itself. The organizational structure must be the United Nations itself, with unrestricted membership for all of the general public. As an organization that vets NGO organizations for inclusion to UN activities, it does not have to vet itself to act in a fiduciary role for the general public to participate in UN activities of all kinds. I would also posit, as per the Charter of the United Nations, that it may not even need the endorsement of a UN member nation's vote to go forward with the general public participation at the UN, as the general public is so obviously ensured to be a stakeholder of the highest order at the UN. As it stands, I see no reason based on the Charter of the United Nations not to allow ECOSOC the ability to administer and make permanent ongoing general public participation a reality at the United Nations. We'll see where that goes. Okay, conclusions. For permanent ongoing general public participations at the United Nations to become a reality, we needed to show that the majority of the general public wanted this participation, and we did that with our survey. That there was a utility to make this possible in a cell phone application, that the internet infrastructure could handle this type of activity, and that the Charter of the United Nations allowed for this participation. And having attained all of these prerequisites, this form of permanent, ongoing general public participation at the United Nations should become reality. Now, we have some recommendations. 1, that the idea of permanent, ongoing participation of the general public at the United Nations activities be recognized as a legitimate formal talking point. 2, that the ability of this form of participation as an online internet-based cell phone and desktop computer application be acknowledged as a legitimate form of participation enabled through the Charter of the United Nations. 3, that the private industry be considered to help make online worldwide general public voting part of the internet infrastructure to make permanent ongoing participation of the general public at the United Nations activities a reality. 4, the importance of the internet cannot be dismissed. The internet should remain free, as the ability to access a free internet is vital for everyone to have the right of freedom of opinion and ultimately self-determination by consensus of everyone on earth at the United Nations. And finally, 5, that the results of consensus on global issues presented to the general public have some weight in decision-making at the United Nations. Okay. Now I've got an extra for you. Now, seeing that travel to the U.S. is no longer a sure thing anymore, especially to a brown guy like me, I have been requested by the membership to also issue a short request on behalf of the general public again, with regards to a positive major mandate for humanity at the United Nations, and here it is, and I promise it will be very, very short. This abstract I'm reading is from a report titled A Positive Major Mandate for Humanity at the United Nations, and it was written by IAIJ, which is the acronym for our journalist organization, and published on January 31st, 2017. Copies which can be downloaded from IAIJ.org. Okay, the United Nations needs a positive mandate in addition to its current mandates of eliminating war and peacekeeping and hunger and many of the other troubles that face mankind, many of which are addressed by the Sustainable Development Goals at the UN. While these current mandates and initiatives are without question good and important mandates and initiatives that require our utmost attention, it would seem that a major positive mandate does not exist that does not address a negative problem in our world. Or in other words, every mandate addresses, for example, strife, poverty, lack of education, whatever. This is a shame, as the human race has so many positive attributes that could be used as a foundation of a positive message and mandate at the United Nations. A positive major mandate agreed upon all brings all peoples of the world together toward a common goal or direction in our culture. Such a common mandate makes it easier as a base or starting point to tackle other problems in our world. A positive mandate could be clear self-determination for the human race as opposed to just existing. Mankind would now have direction and purpose to their existence. Our proposed positive major mandate is as follows. This is just ours. We would welcome an open call to all sorts of positive mandates. But our mandate is this, that all of mankind can express themselves to the limit of their mental and physical abilities. That's our positive mandate. Our version of this positive mandate is simply that it be the fullest expression of mankind's physical and mental abilities. The reason we want this type of mandate is because it not only makes rational sense by allowing all forms of ideas and solutions to problems to be used and advancing our culture, but also because it makes us happy. And our own 13-year experiment called the Fortress Experiment, which, by the way, is now a series of television programming, proves this without question, as all participants were happy when given the chance to freely express themselves, while at the same time involving no negative changes to themselves, their families, their communities, and nations. A positive mandate cannot just be a rational exercise in bringing the mandate into being. It must also be a visceral affirmation. In short, it should feel right to everyone involved, and this does. Adopting the goal of fullest expression of mankind's mental and physical abilities gives the Universal Declaration of Human Rights a reason for being. We need those human rights because they are a necessary part of achieving the goal of the freest expression of mankind's physical and mental abilities. And the reason why is because it makes rational sense and, more importantly, makes us happy. This type of positive mandate has advantages by adoption for the United Nations. But how can we lobby the UN to make it a talking point and possibly a policy issue for a future vote? The best way is to enter into meetings with the relevant agencies at the United Nations and lobby them for exposure of this concept at venues and events that could accommodate this kind of advocacy. Finally, this type of positive major mandate must show, on the basis of our own experiment, for example, that nations, cultures, communities, and individual families of people who will embrace this mandate will not be changed in any way that disrupts society or those cultures and nations. And if we are successful in showing that there are no negatives to adoption, then we would recommend serious discussion on the possibility of adoption by member nations. A positive major mandate at the United Nations can be a good thing and a reality. So there you have it, our version of a positive major mandate for humanity at the United Nations. A mandate that makes rational sense, but also a visceral affirmation as it makes people happy. People have to want this kind of mandate and the direction it ultimately leads to. And a mandate that makes them happy is sure to be embraced by everyone. Okay, that concludes the formal presentation of this side event. Anybody have any questions? Okay, Kyle, our man in the booth, says come up to one of the mics, raise your hand, and he'll energize it for you.
I know what to do. I'm here 36 years every day.
Okay.
I've sat in over 10,000 meetings, so I think I know.
He's got the wrong one. Okay, there we go.
He's got the right one. It's red.
Okay.
Thanks. I'm Richard Jordan. I've represented a number of NGOs and many processes here at the United Nations for, as I say, over 36 years. There are just a couple of points. Number one, at the United Nations, if IAIJ is a nonprofit organization, I don't know. Okay, then we cannot lobby. You use the word lobby. We can advocate. Lobby will get our status removed as a nonprofit. Okay, that's one thing I think it would be useful to keep in mind when you use the terminology advocate. I think that's perhaps a better choice to consider. The other term that everybody uses here is not mankind. It is either humankind or humanity, because at least half of the world is. And we have 4 women and 3 men here, 5 women and 3 men here. Right? So we're gender balanced. Okay, it's humanity. Okay. The other thing, as I mentioned to you before the event started, there was a process started by Harry Lerner and Jeffrey Siegel of the Communication Coordination Committee for the United Nations for over 20 years, called Conferences for a More Democratic United Nations. There's a good deal of material on that online. It investigated the development of a People's Assembly at the United Nations, which would be a third house that would do part of what you have advocated for in terms of we the peoples. That basically doesn't need to exist anymore simply because there are so many organizations, stakeholders, individuals who have come to the United Nations during many of the processes, such as the Open Working Group that established the Sustainable Development Goals. There is already a People's Assembly. When you look at initiatives such as what was behind the International Court of Justice opinion on nuclear weapons, millions of signatures were delivered to the Secretary General upstairs on the 38th floor. So I just wanted to point out that I think it's very important also to know that the term equal rights of men and women was put into the charter by Minerva Bernardino of the Dominican Republic. I knew Minerva very well. And she was, I think, the only woman who actually signed the charter. But that's a very good phrase to keep hammering on. So I just have those to mention. I have to go do nameplates for another organization because they came in and didn't know what to do, and so I know these people very well. Got to go. But thank you for the presentation. Hope that you can get the word out to places like the Conference of NGOs in Consultative Relationship, Congo, with Cyril Ritchie, C-Y-R-I-L, Ritchie, R-I-T-C-H-I-E. He's the president of Congo, which is an umbrella organization of 800 of the largest international organizations that have consultative relationship with the Economic and Social Council. Thanks, Maurice.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Appreciate those insights.
Keep going. It just needs some refinement, but keep going.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions? Then I suggest we break into the smaller groups and give our cell phone application a shot at the table at the front. This side event is now closed. Actually got to hit a gavel. I always wanted to do that. All right, I thank you guys for showing up.